2 minutes behind.
It's all right, mate. We'll see how we go, eh? Welcome, Ms Spence. Do you wish to make a very brief opening statement or straight to questions?
Straight to questions, thanks, Senator.
Thank you very much. Senator Antic, you have a question.
Straight off the bat, thank you, Chair. I'm just interested if you could just guide me through a couple of things. CASA's role in the health and well-being of pilots and flight crew. Are there health screenings done for crew?
Yeah, Senator, we went through this in some detail at our last hearings, but what I might do is ask the head of our stakeholder engagement division, who looks after the AVMAT area in CASA.
Thank you.
To Mr Marcellier.
Partner in crime,
Oh, yeah, it is. No, Malcolm's gone. All right, I'll make this quick. Yeah.
Anyway,
Sorry. Yeah.
Good evening, Senator. Andreas Marcellier, Executive Manager for the Stakeholder Engagement Division. So your question was around health and wellbeing for pilots.
Mm-hmm.
So all pilots are required to have a medical certificate that can either be on an annual basis or a longer period depending on the licence they hold. So through that process they would see a doctor, their doctor typically, to go through those kind of issues.
Have you seen any uptick in cardiac-related incidents over the last 2 or 3 years?
Not anything significant, Senator, no.
Nothing significant.
No.
Are you able to, perhaps this is just easy to, given that this has already been done, to put on notice, but are you able to give me a statistical breakdown for each month during the period 1 January 2018 to 9 January 2023 of the number of medical incidents, episodes or other emergencies suffered by any commercial pilots or commercial flight crew in Australia or international?
So I can look at data that's been reported to us, in terms of other events they'd be reported to the ATSB, but certainly I can look at what data we have.
There we go. Thank you, Chair.
Senator Brockman, anyone else have any questions of...
Thank you. Thank you so much. Welcome, CASA. Are you able to confirm the number of board members that you are supposed to have?
Thanks, Senator. We've actually got a full complement, so that's, I'm just trying to think, it's the chair, we've got, I think, five board members and myself. So
and the Director of Aviation Safety?
That's me, the Director of Aviation Safety.
So you are one in the same?
One, yep, I am.
Okay. So there are currently no vacancies on the CASA board? That's
correct, Senator. We just recently had a board member appointed a week or so ago.
A week or so ago?
Yeah.
So what is the process for selecting those board members?
We actually went through a selection process within the organisation, or through the board, having gone through our sort of skills matrix, identified where the areas we considered were gaps, used a recruitment search agency to identify potential candidates. There was an interview process involving the chair, and on the basis of that we wrote to the Minister recommending someone who actually would meet those skills.
And when did you write to the Minister?
Senator, I'd have to take that on notice. It was sort of maybe November last.
I'm pretty sure you've got your Coro register there.
I don't actually have it in front of me,
person.
But unfortunately I can't. I can tell you it was sort of October or November.
November.
But happy to take that on notice, Senator.
With a recommendation. And when did the Minister inform you of her decision?
In the last 2 weeks.
Is there any? Was there any explanation for the delay?
Just working through the normal processes. I think there's always a gap between meetings and because it's a significant appointment, so it goes through a cabinet process, and there's the gap in meetings between the end of December and the start of the new year. And also the vacancy only came into effect on the 31st of December.
Oh, okay. Yep. What is the quorum for your board meetings?
Simple majority.
Simple majority?
Majority, yeah.
So
that's 4.
5, 6, 7. So that's 4.
That's 7, I think. Yeah, so 4.
Okay. Has there been any meeting of the board when there was no quorum able to be achieved?
No, Senator. Well, certainly not since I've been there, Senator.
Or where quorum's been lost on an issue due to members absenting themselves due to a conflict of interest?
No, Senator.
What about on the board committees, the probity committees, as a result of Ms Hardman's term expiring?
Ms Hardman wasn't actually a member of the two subcommittees of the boards that we've got, so our Board Audit and Risk Committee and our People and Culture Subcommittee. So, there was no issues around quorums, and Ms Hardman wasn't a member.
So there's no vacancies on the board committees?
That's correct.
Yep.
Oh, sorry, Senator. We've got an ability to appoint an extra person to our People and Culture Subcommittee, but that would be an independent member, so not one of the board members, but it's got a quorum to operate in the absence of that
And have
position.
you got an independent member?
Yes, we do. Thanks,
And who's
Senator.
that?
That's Linda Spur.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of managing the appointments process, it's CASA per se, and then you put a recommendation up to the Minister.
In this case, we wrote to the Minister, and my understanding is the Minister would have sought advice from the Department, and the Department would have provided advice around our proposal.
Yep, and then off it goes into government. Why wasn't the expiring director's term extended? Did they retire?
I think there was a desire to, as with all boards, try to get a mix between continuity and new people on the board. The skills, the very strong skills that Ms Hardman brought. We have another board member who's got a similar background in governance, and so it's really trying to address that skills mix that we require on the board.
So the expiring director's term, could have it been extended?
Oh, well, Senator, that would have been a matter for government. That would have been an alternative option that could have been considered.
Did the director seek to retire? Hand in the resignation prior to the term expiring?
No, it had just been a long-standing conversation that we've been having at the board that when Ms Hardman's term expired, we'd be looking for someone with a different skill set to make sure that we had the right balance on the board.
Yep. Just turning to other matters, we've seen unidentified flying objects reported. We've had spy balloons shot down in Allies airspace. I'm just wondering if CASA's updated advice to civil aviation in this country, if you've looked at if similar things could occur in this country, and what would be our response?
Senator, that'd be a fair bit of speculation in there. We haven't had any similar circumstances in Australia. Should something like that occur, then obviously we would engage with appropriate agencies and work out what advice we should be providing to the civil aviation community.
Well, I'm pretty sure the Canadians, the Americans and the other nations impacted didn't wait for that to occur before they had the measures available to shut down airspace. Like the aviation sector knew what to do in the event of those incidents. So my question is to you, have you updated advice to civil aviation in response to these events?
Sorry, Senator.
Are you going to? What conversations have been had domestically about that?
So, Senator, we've got very well established arrangements in place that can be turned on very quickly in order to shut airspace down. If you'd like a more detailed explanation of how those work, I'm happy to pass on to Mr Monaghan.
Thank you.
Certainly. Chris Monaghan, Executive Manager for National Operations and Standards. In terms of your question of something in the sky that's unannounced, as soon as it's detected, the coordination starts. Civil aviation understands if they see something that is unexpected, there's a process to report that, and it'll eventually work its way through air services, and eventually, if it's...
And sorry...
it works through air services before anything happens.
No.
Sorry, please explain.
They would, if somebody saw something there, they would have to tell somebody, and that process starts. Now, if the determination is made that airspace needs to be controlled, there's ability to create temporary restricted areas that can be manipulated as required, and can be updated hourly and daily as required to facilitate wherever that, in the case of something like you've described, whatever the flight path of the track is.
Because some of these were at elevation of 40,000 feet, 20,000 feet, where we have all manner of craft in our skies. Can you just walk me through? So, who do you call? Who do you call in Australia? You said if somebody sees something. Well, this is my question. We're talking about a balloon that looks like it would fit in that movie, but.
Look, I think, Senator, there'll be multiple avenues. They might report it to.
Please
Home
walk
Affairs
me
or-
through. I want to be really clear about the process, please, because I'm told there's a process. It's all in hand. What is it?
I think, Senator, I can talk to you about the process as soon as it's brought to our attention. If there is, and we would then, as saying, we've got very well-known arrangements in place for how to alert the civil aviation community.
So because
I can
I'm
talk
not
you through
working for
those.
CASA, it may be well known within CASA. It may be well known within the aviation industry. It's not well known in the Senate, and it's not well known in the Australian public. Please talk me through the process. Should a similar event occur domestically here? There is a gentleman here nodding his head very enthusiastically.
So,
Please
Senator,
help.
What I wanted to let you know is we run a 24-hour safety reporting line. So if a member of the public was to see something, they could come to us. What Ms Spence is saying is that we would expect in a normal course of events that an object will be detected either by Air Services Australia, who run the civil air traffic system, or by our Defence Department, and they would notify us, and that would start the coordination. So in an operational sense, they would be the two key avenues that we.
And then, so what happens? Are we able to shut airspace very quickly?
So at a tactical sense, yeah, Air Services Australia could manage traffic in a tactical sense to avoid the area. If it required airspace to be shut down or excluded or restricted areas, we run a 24-hour service, again, in our Office of Airspace Management, where that could happen. And of course, depending on the nature of the event, different agencies would be involved.
Do you run simulations of these type of events? I know in other departments when we've had national crises, there's been simulations between different agencies, state and territory governments, Commonwealth departments, to make sure everybody knows what to do in the event of such an incident. Do you run simulations of these sort of events so everyone is not just got the manual but knows which button to press?
It's something. I mean, obviously, the recent events have sort of brought have brought it sort of into focus that now is a good time to do it. We have been talking about it. We haven't done one sort of in the last 18 months, but it's certainly something that as an organisation we've been involved in previously, and we're working towards doing a similar kind of exercise. But it would be, as you say, in consultation with the other key agencies to make sure that all parts of the system are tested.
So you said nothing in the last 18 months. When was the last simulation?
I'm sorry, Senator, that's before my time, but I'm happy to take it on notice and provide that to the committee.
Mr Monaghan?
Not during my time for that specific situation you described.
No one knows. Okay, I'd appreciate that on notice. And it would be CASA that would be tasked with as the lead, or who would be the lead?
Not necessarily,
For the
Senator.
civil aviation aspect.
The last one of those simulations that I was involved in was when I was still within the department, and the department actually coordinated, and that was around what to do if there was a similar incident to one of the UK airports when there were drones which were spotted at the airport, and we ran a desktop simulation, but that was run by the department. So again, I just have to take on notice the last time that one of those
We spent a long
activities.
time getting regulations in around drones, didn't we?
No.
I know, I remember all.
Around that.
Yep.
I think it was a couple of years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's no, with respect to what to do in these sort of situations, there's no ambiguity, and there's no need to update the current guidelines.
No, Senator. As I said, we would use those sorts of arrangements for a whole range of things that might occur.
Can I just get a bit of an update on the Qantas flight with its single engine fail coming in from New Zealand, and any action CASA's taken as a result of that?
Yes, Senator. Obviously, we've taken very seriously the reports to see if there was any safety concerns. From our perspective, the use of turnarounds is an important part of industry's ability to deal with potential incidents, and so an important part of their safety management systems. We've done our own analysis, not just on the New Zealand turnaround, but just looking at the number that have been happening and been reported. And so analysis of both ATSB and air services occurrence data going over a 10-year timeframe revealed no material increase in the number of or severity of air turnback type occurrences in 2023 to the start of 2023 to date.
Is CASA aware of the difficulties that arose during COVID but have continued of access to appropriate parts, certain skill sets and certification?
Yes, Senator, we're very conscious of the impact on the supply chain and something that we've been working
So when you say
closely.
you've been working on it,
We've been more focused on the skills side of issues rather than sort of some of those supply chain issues around parts. But I know we spoke, I think, a bit at our last hearing about the things that we've done to try and support industry through the challenges associated with some of the supply chain fragility.
so have any concerns been raised with you about the quality and strength of the maintenance work that's been done by our domestic air fleet?
No, Senator, not
No
that,
one's raised any concerns about
not that I'm aware
availability
of.
of parts, the certification of parts?
There are a couple of issues there in terms of there are certainly concerns about the availability of parts, but we've been able to work within the system to provide some relief without compromising safety.
Correct.
What does that look like?
That means giving people more. Most parts, there's a set period of time
Yes.
that you'd have to replace them. We would do, based on a risk assessment, provide some relief in terms of if it's normally every 500 hours, you might say every 1,000 hours. You wouldn't do it without some kind of analysis and risk assessment, but they're the sorts of things that we've got in our power to look at.
Well, given we operate some of the safest airlines in the world in this country, the risk analysis, I suggest, would be very positive. If
Which
it's
is
a
how we've been
desktop
able to
analysis.
do regulatory relief.
But can I understand how, is that an exemption granted? Does an airline have to apply to you for an exemption?
That'd be the normal approach.
Just
yes,
talk me
Senator.
through that
Yes,
process.
Senator, typically a operator comes into an issue with obtaining a part will quite often work with the original equipment manufacturer who designed the aircraft to look at that particular part, and they do their analysis as well to say how well does that part function. Can it have, for lack of a better term, an extended life or extended inspections between it? And we work in concert and evaluate that along, and do our own risk assessment to try to provide relief that is temporary in nature. It's not typically a particularly long-term until they can get the parts in place to restore themselves to the normal cycle.
Got it.
Okay.
How much relief has been given? How many parts have been relieved?
Senator, I think I'd have to take on notice whether we can even, how we would manage that
Well,
kind of request.
I'd
but-
hope there's a process.
Yeah. It's just whether it's how you'd actually provide advice on what exemptions we've actually, and approvals we've provided in that space. But I'd have to take it on notice. I don't have that in
So
front of
just to
me.
be very clear, Ms Spence, so you don't get back to the office and say it's an too much resource to be. I'm understanding that the airlines have to apply to CASA for a specific exemption for either the type of part or whatever that happens to be, right? So I'm getting nods. Let the Hansard reflect the nods. So that application for exemption, for extension, for relief must all be collated somewhere. So I don't anticipate you are to be unable to answer that question.
And the only thing, Senator, it won't just be airlines. It'll be smaller operators as well. But we will respond to that on notice.
Thank you.
Can I just jump in there,
Yeah.
Senator McKenzie? smaller operators can apply for exemptions as well? How small?
Anyone who's got an aircraft that had, because all aircraft is going to have the same issues around replacement of parts after certain hours. Again, there will be, private owners would also have to go through a process to get relief from replacing parts. And everyone's had supply chain issues.
The information that Senator McKenzie has requested, could we have that broken down by
I think we should be able to do
sector?
that, yes. Yeah.
That'd be great.
Yeah, or at least size of aircraft. I think
Whether
that'd
it's
be-
an international, whether it's an international part or one that's flown domestically, I think would be useful, because there is a lot of mythology around the recycling of parts.
Senator, we'll pull together.
Are you aware of
information
that?
as- I'm not, Senator.
Mr Monaghan, are you aware of that?
If your question is concerns about the authenticity of parts, yes, that's a supply chain concern. It's well noted, and that's why parts coming from the original equipment manufacturers and tracking of all that, and that's forms a process that every operator has to comply with, both either the airline operator or the maintenance organization that provides those parts, to make sure they don't have either a grey market or one that is not authentic at all. And
Thank you. I look forward to the answer.
Right, I know there's a
Brockman?
couple of other
Senator,
questions too. Sorry. Senator White just wanted to clarify something, and then Senator Roberts is waiting patiently too.
So-
And yourself. Yeah, sorry, Senator Brockman.
Just with airline parts, part of the issue is how many they have in stock, isn't it? How many the airlines have in stock. And so large airlines often have lots of things in stock because they have a wider range of aircraft, and they also know when they've got to do their maintenance. Am I correct about that?
I think they've got very sophisticated inventory
They
programs in
do.
place.
I know about them a lot. So have you noticed that as part of this problem that Senator McKenzie says exists, is because some of those larger airlines don't want to keep the parts in stock because it's inventory that is, contingent?
Senator, I've got no evidence in front of me that suggests that the airlines have been increasing their use of the exemptions. I just know that we've been using that regulatory relief across the aviation community. It may well be more weighted towards smaller single operators than it is amongst our airlines,
Because
but we'd take it on notice.
Parts are money, aren't they? And the airlines make their money by being in the air, don't they? So there's no benefit necessarily other than an on-book benefit for not being in the air.
Yeah, Senator, I've got no advice suggesting that there's sort of some kind of gaming thing going on with the airlines, but we can provide factual advice around.
Yeah, it
what
would be
exemptions
interested in
we've been
breakdown by
provided.
airline and breakdown by type.
Yeah.
And I guess you would have a fairly good idea of what the inventory that they keep on various aircraft.
We would be more focused on how they meet their requirements than what they
so
have
their
on-
regular maintenance, their full-on maintenance. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Senator White. Senator Roberts, then Senator. I'll go to Senator Brockman, sorry.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for being here. Now, we specifically requested Dr. Kate Manderson be here. She's not.
I didn't receive that advice. Apology, Senator.
Who would be her direct supervisor?
So it's not her direct supervisor, but Mr. Marcellier is supervisor.
Medical.
Sorry?
Covers the medical side of things?
Yes, that's
Okay,
correct.
thank you. Does Dr. Manderson's role as Principal Medical Officer for CASA have her full attention?
I'm sorry, Senator, what?
Does Dr. Manderson's role as Principal Medical Officer for CASA have her full attention?
She's dedicated to the role, absolutely.
Well, the reason I ask is because I understand that in 2020 she was, quoting from her Twitter, a chair of 2 boards, a director for 3 more, owned 4 medical practices and a COVID clinic, among many other pursuits. What's her current status in terms of chair and directorships of other boards?
Senator, I would get the detail on notice. I do know that she is involved in
You're quite busy.
some other aspects, but she's absolutely dedicated to CASA, and we're very satisfied with the time we get from her.
Could you also find out, please, on notice, does she still own and operate the 4 medical practices in the COVID clinic?
My understanding is that she has an interest in some medical practices, but doesn't actively work in those.
Does she administer, or does she supervise people or employ people who administer COVID injections through those medical practices and COVID clinic?
Senator, I'd have to get the detail for you on
you.
notice.
If the answer is yes, then she's received money from the government.
Senator,
For doing
as
so.
Mr Marchell, you said, we'll take that on notice.
Right. Well, the question is, if she has received money from the government or her businesses received money from the government, has she declared that conflict of interest?
So, Senator, Dr Manderson, when she joined CASA, went through the normal conflict of interest declaration processes that we have, and we have in place arrangements to manage those potential conflicts. 2021,
I think it was,
we'll take that on notice.
So,
Okay, thank you.
Senator, one of the important elements to note is that it's a requirement for medical practitioners to maintain some medical practice. So our doctors do typically have an involvement in the medical profession, and that's a requirement of them being able to maintain their
Just the
certification.
level of involvement and whether or not there's money from the government.
Sure.
They're 2 important questions.
So there's no... Well, we'll take it on notice.
We'll take it on notice, thanks, Senator.
I turn, before I get to something else that's happening in the United States, and ask you whether it's happening here with regard to medicals, are you aware, my office sent you this paper?
Yes, Senator.
Okay. Are you aware, you would have seen a copy of the adverse events and deaths attributed to various vaccines in the history, the last 14 vaccines that have been withdrawn?
Senator, as I think we went through in some detail at our last hearings, we've got no evidence in Australia to suggest any issues associated with vaccinations in Australia.
No, and that's what bothers me, because you also, I repeatedly asked you, Mr Machea, that on whose advice did CASA allow the airlines to mandate injections? And I only could get back the experts.
So, Senator, I think we went through last time, we didn't have any involvement in the mandates, and that was a matter between airlines and the medical authorities in Australia.
Why did you allow the mandates?
It's not a matter for us. We have no view on it, one way or the
Okay.
other. It's a matter between airlines.
Let's see why I think it is a matter,
Yeah.
and ask you questions about this. That paper that you received was written by 7 medical people, professionals. Dr Philip Altman has got 40 years working with the TGA as a consultant and with Big Pharma. He worked for Big Pharma under contract. James Rowe, similarly, 40 years professional experience, including manufacturing practices. Wendy Hoy, one of Australia's most esteemed medical professors, plus 4 others. They document how alarmed they are at the fact that the COVID injections bypassed normal testing procedures in the United States. They did not get tested in this country. Are you aware of that?
So, Senator, our interest is aviation safety, and as Ms Pence said, we have seen nothing about COVID vaccinations that would cause us any concern about aviation safety. The matters you're talking about are not matters for CASA. They are matters for health authorities, and we do not get involved in those matters.
So let's turn to pilots. Because a lot of pilots are now complaining. And in America, a number of pilots, 1,000 at Southwest Airlines, I've been told by law in America, have been stood down for medical reasons because they cannot pass their medical examinations to continue as a pilot.
Senator, we're not
1,000.
seeing the same in Australia.
Evidence on that, Nelson?
Sorry? I
We're not
missed it.
seeing the same in Australia, Senator.
Okay, well, that's not what some pilots are telling us. So let's have a look at the... I understand that the designated Aviation Medical Examiner's Handbook contains a limit specified by CASA for systolic and diastolic blood pressures and EKG parameters. The United States FAA has recently changed their acceptable limits in terms of EKG parameters. Is CASA considering any changes to systolic, diastolic or EKG parameter limits?
Senator, we have parameters around heart conditions and heart health. We've made some good changes probably 6 months ago that have adopted a risk model that's developed in New Zealand around cardiac risk. I'm not aware of what the changes are that you're referring to in the United States.
So you're not aware on the basis of the FAA's change?
I'm not aware of what that change is, no.
So you haven't made...
We'll take that on notice, Senator, and review if there's anything in there for Australia that we need to act on as well.
So you haven't made any changes in the last 3 years?
We have made changes to cardiac risk assessment. As I mentioned, we've adopted a New Zealand-based risk model, which we think assesses cardiac risk much more effectively than what we've used before, and it involves some of the matters that you're talking about.
Does CASA recognise that severe cardiac conditions such as myocarditis and pericarditis are known adverse events attributed to COVID vaccines? Just a yes or no is sufficient.
So, Senator, we are aware that they are generally associated with patients that have had COVID or recovering from COVID, as well as vaccines, but it's a much more common condition for somebody that has had COVID from the data than from the vaccine.
These are now known to be associated with the COVID injections.
And with COVID too, Senator Roberts.
With COVID, yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Was CASA a participant in any consultation with the airlines before they enacted blanket vaccine mandates on their pilots?
No, Senator,
None at
as
all.
I said, we have no involvement in that and no interest in that.
Given significant adverse events and reactions are a potential outcome of COVID vaccination, why wasn't CASA consulted?
Senator,
Because
can
these adverse events were actually stipulated by some of the manufacturers.
Senator, we've got no evidence of adverse effects in pilots in Australia. We have no reports of adverse effects from COVID vaccinations in Australia.
Can I just say, Senator Roberts, that you did touch on this last time, and Senator Antic has had a few questions today, and I think Senator Rennick. I don't know if Ms Spence can make it any more clear that your line of question...
Let's change then, Chair.
Yeah, sure. Okay,
change.
thank you.
I'll go to a separate issue then. It relates to a pilot by the name of Matt Arnold. He discovered he had kidney stones in February 2022. He did the right thing and notified CASA. Matt had 6 rounds of laser surgery to remove the kidney stones, which was 3 more rounds than his urologist felt comfortable with recommending. The extra surgeries were completed to satisfy CASA's arbitrary ruling that there be absolutely no retained stones. At the end of the 6 surgeries, Matt still had some minor retained stones, which is common apparently. His urologist certified they were stable and extremely unlikely to pose any risk. The only way to completely remove the minor stones is by percutaneous lithotomy surgery, considered so high risk that Matt's urologist refused to recommend it given the stability of the minor stones and the risk-benefit of the operation. Despite this, CASA refuses to reinstate Matt's Class 1 medical clearance, effectively ending his flying career. How can this be considered a reasonable reaction, and why is CASA refusing to respect the opinion of a qualified urologist?
So, Senator, I don't know the circumstances of the individual case you've talked about. What I can tell you is that we do consider kidney stones to be quite a serious safety-relevant condition, and the reason for that is that kidney stones can bring on very rapid onset of debilitating pain, and in flight you can imagine that would be quite a serious event. So while I don't know the details of the case you're talking about, that is a condition that we treat quite seriously.
Do you still maintain, as you did last Senate estimates, that there is no perverse incentive for pilots to not report medical conditions given CASA is unreasonable in their treatment of reports?
Senator, can I just make a point that we process around 25,000 medical applications every year. We refuse 100. So I think it's important to note that while you'll be able to find individual cases where there have been issues, and we can, I think we could talk through those in details, but I think the suggestion that we are unreasonable does not align with the statistics.
So I asked you, do you still maintain that there is no perverse incentive for pilots to not report medical conditions?
I still do maintain that,
Okay.
Senator.
Is it possible that there is a pilot flying in Australia right now with an entire kidney removed and you wouldn't know about it because their career would be at risk if they told you?
Of course that's possible, Senator.
Why are pilots prohibited from taking the weight loss drug Duramine or phentermine? They can't even fly after they stop taking it until they receive a medical clearance.
Senator, we publish clinical guidance on a number of medications. I don't know the detail of that specific medication, but there would be a safety-relevant effect that would require that provision. If you'd like the detail, we can get the detail for you on notice.
Would that be tested in an aviation environment?
I don't know what you mean by tested.
Well, how do you assess the drugs?
Senator, we'll take that on notice.
So I'd like to know whether or not you've tested it in the aviation environment. how many reports of pericarditis and myocarditis have been made to CASA?
We'll take that on notice, Senator.
My understanding is that CASA, through its medical officers, can essentially override a medical examiner's conclusions or issues. Is this accurate?
Yes, Senator, we could if there was a concern with the outcome. But as I said, of the 25,000 applications that come into CASA every year, only 100 are refused. So I think it's important to keep that in mind when asking these questions.
Can you, in addition to that, could you tell me on notice what the cases were related to?
The 100 that were refused?
Yes, please.
We'll take that on notice, noting
Yeah.
we'd have to maintain privacy considerations as well for the individuals.
Absolutely. Yep. Thank you, Chair.
All right, thanks, Senator Roberts. Now, Senator Brockman, you've been waiting patiently, and we have a 9:30 break. So
Yeah, no, I understand. I'll get through this as quickly as I can, and these aren't particularly time-urgent questions, so I can come back to them at the budget estimates round. Ms Spence, does CASA keep track of, I guess, the general, not health in Senator Roberts' terms, but the general health of the GA sector? Like, do you monitor how the GA sector is going, number of pilots, number of charter operators in Australia? Do you track those sort of details?
We do, obviously, because we issue licences, so we would have, we've got visibility of all licence holders, all approvals that are provided, depending on what type of operation you are, what type of operation it is. I wouldn't say that we necessarily monitor the health. I'd say that's probably more of a departmental issue, but we are mindful of the impact of our regulations on the GA industry. And one of the things that we did actually introduce probably about the middle of last year was a general aviation work plan, because there are a lot of issues raised about the impact of our regulations on the sustainability of the GA sector. And so we thought it was important that we were very transparent on the work that we're actually doing to address the issues that industry are raising with us, which are having the most significant impacts, and just trying to get that balance between maintaining a safe system but also making sure that we don't have unnecessary regulations that are precluding some operators from doing what they can safely do. So we actually have a GA work plan that's published, which sets out what our commitment to various actions are and the timeframes for delivery, and we acknowledge if we miss timeframes, and we're also open to industry saying something that's more important to them is not on the list, and we have a conversation about what that might be.
And I say this with all due respect, and you could say it right across government and agencies. It's very rare to actually see a rollback of regulation to make things easier for the sector you're regulating. Can you point to a concrete example of where you've actually made it easier for the sector you're regulating?
So things like examiner proficiency checks, so making sure that someone who is actually a flight examiner, previously they had to be approved, they had to be checked by a CASA officer. Back in June we actually changed that, so an appropriate qualified industry representative could do that, and that sort of precluded, there were some bottlenecks around people getting their checks. We also introduced an arrangement in September 22, which again, rather than CASA always being the person to do it, we've allowed flight examiner rating courses to be delivered by industry. We've provided grade 1 training and endorsement holders with more privileges. We've established a multi-engine helicopter class rating. One of the big things, we removed the mandatory requirement for Cessna aircraft to be maintained according to the supplemental inspection documents. We removed the stall speed limit for lightweight aeroplanes that can be administered by an approved self-administering aviation organisation. And we also finalised an air display administration and procedure advisory circular and protocol. And these are all issues that industry had raised with us, and they're all areas where we have reduced the regulatory, I won't call it burden, but arrangements, and open it up for industry to do more.
Well, I absolutely, I accept those are real changes that may have benefited some in the sector, but I do hear, as I travel particularly regionally in Western Australia, the constant pressure that the GA sector and private pilots feel they're under from the regulator, and I'll give you just one example, and it touches on, in a very different way, some of the issues Senator Roberts was raising. 6-7 years ago, I know I was on RRAT around 5 years ago.
We missed you, Slade.
I know, it's good to be back.
No, it's nice
Chair.
to have you back.
We were looking at that point, the situation in the US, where they had gone to a different self-assessment model for private pilots, where private pilots could self-assess on their health. It brought a lot of private pilots back into the system.
Yep.
I know the sector here has been asking CASA to look at this, and we went down a different path. Australia went down a different path. I shouldn't say we, that's the royal we. You've talked about some of the areas where you feel you've made a real difference with regulatory reform. This is one that's been adopted in another country, a much larger jurisdiction, I would argue, with probably much more complex airspace requirements than Australia. You might disagree with me on that, but that would be my sense. It seems to have worked there. It's largely been lauded as a positive change with no safety downside. I understand the UK has gone down a similar sort of model. So why hasn't Australia adopted that?
So we've just, so again, the reform to our medical clearance processes is actually on our General Aviation Work Plan. We completed a consultation towards the end of last year, and we're working through options around what we can actually do, both within our own powers and also potential regulatory change. So I'll ask Mr Marcelli to give a bit more detail if that would be helpful.
The Chair's really keen on me finishing in 1 minute, so I don't want chapter and verse. I'm happy for that to be taken on notice. But is that one of the options on the table?
It is.
It is one of the options on the table?
We're considering what other jurisdictions are doing, absolutely. I think there are some misconceptions about the US system because it's often described as a self-declare, I sign myself off, when in fact you are required to go and see a doctor in the US as part of that system. So we're looking both at that model, and we're also looking at a model where you can actually
But it's you could do a general GP checkup, could be going to see a doctor, correct?
Yes, and we do actually have that here now. We call it a basic Class 2 certificate. It's not exactly the same, but it's a similar concept. But we are, to answer your question, we're looking at all of those different models, and we're currently formulating the policy informed by the consultation that Ms Spence mentioned. We expect to have reforms in place during this calendar year on that
During
issue.
this calendar year?
Yeah.
And when will you go to consultation with the industry on that, or is that happening now?
So we've done the first round late last year. We expect to be consulting on final kind of settings probably middle of this year.
Could this committee be kept informed of that process, please,
Absolutely.
Chair?
Happy to, yeah. Very happy
Excellent.
What I might do, Senator Brockman, is just with the indulgence of Hansard and Broadcasting and the staff, there's just a couple, single questions. I'd like to finish CASA so Ms Spence and her team could run away. Did you want one more? We'll just delay the smoko break for about 5 or 10 minutes.
I'm happy to come back at budget, Chair.
No, and I'm happy to send them away.
Yep.
Oh, that's good. Okay, fine. Now, a very quick one, Senator Whish-Wilson.
Very quick couple of questions and maybe
Hang on, that
super
was
quick.
one that went to a couple. You just did this ex-Senator Fiona Nash on
One
me.
with Part A and Part B. Look, just quickly, do you have any jurisdiction or do you have any interagency liaison around weather balloons, which there are thousands of, and whether they present a flight safety risk?
We would have, I genuinely don't know the specifics on weather balloons, but anything that's in airspace that could create a potential risk, as we were discussing with Senator McKenzie before, if there was an identification of a risk, we could close the airspace down. I don't know what we can do around
Perhaps I can, I want to make sure I understand your question. Your question is,
Yeah.
if anyone is going to launch a balloon, let's say like you've described, into the air, they have an obligation to then engage to make sure they have the right approvals to do it and they're in the right kind of airspace. It starts then, there's a different question. Once it's in the air, should something go awry or should they do something having not done that process? And that's the one we discussed earlier. But if you're a company, a commercial company that wants to use it for testing of some kind or weather or whatever research we get often, those people have to come to us to get a flight approval to do that.
To get a flight approval,
Yes.
and then they have to have a system in place to track
I'm sorry.
Then they have to have a system in place to track the air balloon, because some of them go into the ionosphere. Like,
Yes, especially the high altitude, high dwell ones. Absolutely.
so how high would some commercial flights go into long haul?
It depends on what they want to do. If they're high altitude, high dwell, going to be there for a long time, they can be very high. They can be 50 or 60,000 feet, especially if they're doing atmospheric or research or something like that. It all depends on their business model.
And if you don't know this, perhaps you could take it on notice. Has there been any collisions with weather balloons that you're aware of?
No, not that I'm aware of at all.
So it is pretty well managed then? Like
Yes,
in terms of-
and it's not a high volume business. And usually what you're concerned about the risk would be probably the transitory time where they're going through would be the traditional altitudes. Those higher altitudes, there's not many people operating at 60 and 70,000 feet. It's coming and going at altitude is where they are. And those are well managed as part of their application and part of the approval process.
Thank you very much. That's all I want to know. Great.
Thank you, Senator Whish-Wilson. Yes, Senator White.
Are you able to tell us how many Australian registered aircraft that were, taken to the graveyards in Alice Springs and overseas have returned back into service, and how many remain out of service? I know, I'm firing up at 9:30.
Part of it will be the graveyard is they go into storage. That's different than no longer being used. That'd be for individual airlines to determine if they brought that aircraft back. It's sometimes a capital decision over the course of but we
I
don't
understand
keep
that, but
track.
they're Australian registered, so presumably if they've come back, you would know that they've come back into service, because you'd know who went in, Australian registered. I'm not talking about the others, I'm talking about Australian registered.
Yeah, Senator, we if somebody maintains a registration, they don't need to notify us that they've parked it. So we don't keep that data directly, but the numbers are small. So most of the Australian airlines kept their domestic fleets operating, and some of the international, like the A380s that Qantas had were parked. So the numbers are small, but we would have to make inquiries. We wouldn't keep that data on hand.
I should take that on notice. I'm interested in how many were put put aside, and then how many have come back.
We'd have to pull the airlines to see what. How many. But the assurance part of it is when they put it in storage, there is a manufacturer-driven checklist for how many days, whether it's 30, 60, 90, and then coming out the
Just
same
interested
way.
in numbers. I do understand.
Senator, we'll have a look at what data things, but as both Mr Monahan and Mr Marchesi are saying, I don't think they have to actually notify us if they're putting it into storage.
Thank you.
All right, just, Senator Canavan, did you have any more? Safe? Great, thank you. Just, I'm loath to ask this, but as you're walking out the door, Ms Spence, this committee did do a GA inquiry.
Yep.
So there's a lot of questions coming to the Secretariat, how far away the government is from a response. You don't have to tell me here, it's all right.
You might want to ask the department, Senator.
Okay. All right, thank you. Thank you.
Someone's tweeted.
Okay, oh, sorry, Lewis.
Someone's tweeted
That now,
an unfamiliar object spotted above Sydney.
yeah. You can kick off? Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm going to services. Yeah, that's all right. No worries. It's 9:35, sorry. We'll now break till 9:35 plus 15, and we'll see you back here then. 9:50. Thank you. With Air Services.